Okay, so two things up front, and the first one is definitely for sure, since I know from my experience that after all the failed attempts that I had already today, I won't go through this review without any hiccups or bloopers. So since it's Sunday, I think that is fine. The second thing though is already that this is my second TV review. And even though it's just my second one, based on your comments and from the feedback that I got and just by watching it on my own, I definitely already learned a lot. I still have a lot to learn, but what I definitely got is that the first one of the A1 with about 30 minutes was just too long. But for all those wondering why, it actually had a reason. Since all Sony TVs are based on Android TV, they all work the same way, they have the same kind of functionality, at least in a broader spectrum. And that's why I thought I will just take a few more minutes to go into things like, for example, the fact that not all HDMI ports are the same, that your mouse could flicker if you use it on a PC, and a few things like, for example, also HDR modes and banding and so on. So in case you want to know more about that, I can just now easily refer you to that review and fully focus today on this TV, which would actually be the Sony XE9300 in the US. In Germany it's called the 9305, and this is kind of the second tier LCD, because I already reviewed the flagship, so I see what's kind of the best on the OLED side. And I wanted to review the ZD9 as well, so I can see if we get a little bit lower, if we still get pretty much the same experience. I did not quite achieve that, but I guess soon enough. But maybe even more so important, the XE9300 costs noticeably less, because the ZD is around at 3,200, where this one is just 2,000 for the 65-inch version. This is the 55-inch version, which is around 1,500. So you save a lot of money. And later on I will tell you which tech might work better for you, because especially for me, after just using the LCD for a few days, my decision has been made if my next TV will be an OLED or an LCD. Which one, of course, that is, I will tell you a little bit later, because that would be a little bit too early on. So now let's get into the first thing, the design. The bezels are still definitely quite thin. Of course, not quite as thin as on the flagship, the A1, but it definitely looks like a flagship TV. The back doesn't really matter all that much. You can see the foot, and this time it's actually raised by about 7 centimeters. On the A1 we had that kind of anomaly, the unique thing that it was straight on the desk. Now in terms of the foot, it stands stable, even though I have to say it looks like it's ever so slightly leaned backwards, something you don't notice in normal use though. At the foot, the whole mechanism works fine. You can of course attach it to the wall as well. The mounts are there. The screws, according to the manual, still not, but at least my review unit this time had one. Now on the back, on this side we have all the more often accessed ports, which is quite easy, quite convenient, and a little bit below that you have the HDMI ports and some other ones. The important HDMI ports though, 2 and 3, because you will definitely need those for 4K HDR and also at your PC. Otherwise you will have some issues, but like I said, I've talked already about that in my review. Now the next thing would be the speakers. They work, they are fine, they are good enough for a YouTube video maybe, and also some TV shows. But if you buy a TV of this caliber, you definitely want also the sound, because you want to get fully immersed not just into the picture, but also into the sound. And this way, now with those 7 centimeters, you would have a little bit space for a flat soundbar in case you want to use that, because you maybe don't need something like this. But a decent sound system would definitely be welcome, and in those days they are already quite cheap, so this is definitely an option. Now the next thing to talk about would be the remote. In terms of layout, it's pretty much the same as on the A1, so they didn't really change much throughout the series, which is absolutely nice. The difference is that, for example, now the YouTube button back then was a Google Play button, even though the YouTube button does not do anything for me. Maybe you have to set it up. I didn't really care enough, because you can quickly enough enable or access YouTube anyways. You don't have a voice speak functionality, but this TV actually has already Alexa support. Hopefully I didn't trigger anything just yet, but in case you want to use voice, you can get that. Otherwise, I like the layout, because everything is kind of in sections. Everything has its unique shape and you easily find whatever you want to. Still not backlit, which would have been nice, especially at first when you don't know where the buttons are, but I think that is absolutely good. Now, the next thing. Let's actually go into the menus, and since I've already covered those so much in depth already in my first review, I don't need to, but still a few things I have to get into. The first thing, what was called on the A1 action menu, now is just options. These are, if at all, the most frequently used settings, like for example picture mode, in case you really want to use picture in picture, speaker, picture and sound. But let's actually go already into the live football mode, because that is something that I just want to go into. Because just look at it, and yeah, as you can see, the difference is huge. It boosts up colors, it boosts up brightness, it boosts up the dynamic, but it also introduces a lot of issues, because as you can see, artifacts, some graphical glitches and so on just don't make the appearance as it is. So same as on the A1, I would just say turn it off. And if you want a more vibrant picture, that is definitely no issue, especially since I turned the brightness all the way down. This is at 0 for the review, just so it won't get overblown, which already could be a hint for you of how much brighter this is compared to an OLED display. But when it comes to the sport, I have to tell you, it works just fine. I think it personally looks a little bit better, a little bit more right compared to an OLED TV. It's not a big difference, and of course, the better the TV, the better sports will get, because sports seems to be still something that is not that easy to display, but this is absolutely no issue in my book. And that's why I actually want to do one thing now and get into the basic picture things, because let's actually access this here. Now let's talk about the whites. This is the first thing. The OLED wasn't perfectly uniform. It had a little bit of some degrading or diminishing of the brightness on the outsides, on the edges. It's still the same here. Here it gets a little bit less on all 4 edges. Does it matter? I would say no. Especially if you even use, for example, where it's most obvious in Windows, in a browser. At the bottom you have the taskbar, at the top you have your browser bar, right and left isn't so much of an issue. So I never bothered in normal use, and in normal content the little bit of shift that you have at the top is not anything to speak of. Now what you can't see right now, but I'm going to show you in an overlay, are the viewing angles, because I just have to tell you one thing. The viewing angles are definitely one of the bigger differences compared to an OLED, because where on an OLED I can still watch from this angle and see everything pretty much just as good as from anywhere else. So if you have a very wide living room, this will be a benefit. On the LCD this is noticeably worse, especially on the browser, white shift to yellow and such. But if you are in a big enough kind of angle, it should be still absolutely fine. So this is not an issue. But the blacks, I have to talk about these, because this is using, I think if I didn't get that wrong, edge LED technique to backlight, and at least on my unit it's not nearly perfect, because what I have here, you can't see it, but I will try to show it in an overlay. You have on the upper left side a little bit of some glow, and then on the upper side a little bit more towards the center, a big stripe where it gets brighter, and a little bit on the right as well. Now, is this an issue? And I would just say not really, because especially if you have your light in your room on, you won't really even notice, because your eyes can't see such minute differences. But if you watch a movie, for example, in pitch black darkness, and you have the transition from one scene to another where it's completely black and your eyes are adjusted a little bit more to that, you sometimes see this slightly brighter part. Does it bother me? No. Because I'm not quite sure how reviewers actually review TVs, but the way I did it is I was just using this TV as I would use a TV. For about 4 weeks I just watched content, and of course, since I am a reviewer, I look out for things that might annoy me, things that might not be as great. But the viewing angles are definitely not that. The white wasn't that either, because it's a very clean, and in the important part definitely very uniform white. The black also. Now one thing, I have to get into the black, since this is already quite a dark scene. Blacks aren't on an AMOLED level. Of course, you don't have the pitch black blacks, you don't have the amazing contrast, the pretty much infinite contrast, and this is, along with the viewing angles, but also the brightness, which is another thing, and actually a disadvantage on the OLEDs, an upside of the OLED, because blacks here are actually quite good. Especially, that was something that I was very pleased to see. If you have a movie with 21:9 and you have the black bars, these are as good as possible black. Not completely shut off on as an OLED, but if you have the lights turned on, if it's not completely dark, it looks like they are actually off. And even in complete darkness, I actually found it super nice and not distracting at all, because on many TVs it still looks like dark gray. So this is good here. What of course can't reach quite the level is if you have a lot of dark scenes. you don't have all that contrast. You just don't have the dynamic range, and darker parts are just a little bit more illuminated from the backside, which is a little bit different on the X900, which is even a lower tier model, which is about $500 less, which isn't quite as bright as this one from what I got. It has full array lighting, so it's actually the better tech for the backlight, but this one is just more high quality, and this actually makes one thing up. So even though this is maybe not the newest tech in terms of backlight anymore, if you make it high quality enough, then it is still better than something cheaper. So that's why, just being this the one big difference to the 900 or 9005, it's still cheaper, the 9000. Of course, if it's 500 worth or not, I'm not quite sure. I will have to try the 9000, and I definitely want to see of how much the difference is, because one of the highlights of this one and the big advantage over OLED is the amazing brightness. Because when I did my review for the A1, I had it at about 20 of brightness out of 50. Not to overblow in this video here, I'm at completely 0. I couldn't get any darker, and I used this TV though with about 20, where I used the OLED at around 40, and the limit is already 50. So especially for someone like me who uses a TV a lot, especially also in the browser where it's a lot of white on an OLED display over time, especially in Windows, it could burn in. Not an issue here, and it will dim at some point. I don't think the dimming is really an issue, because I never experienced it, especially on back in the days on plasmas after years and years. But here you don't have to risk anything, and the reserves that you have on this one, even though if it would actually dim over time, are so much bigger. Because of course I can't put it in numbers, but I would say that this one is roughly twice as bright as the A1, because like I said, I was at 20 where I was at 40, and it's not just that, it's the dynamic range at the higher end of the spectrum, because of course the OLED has the dynamic range in the lower brightness sections, because the blacks are great and you have just more differentiation in terms of grays, darks, and just blacks and so on. This still has the kind of differentiations, but just doesn't have quite the dynamic range to get even deeper. And that's the thing about HDR. HDR is about the deepest blacks and the brightest whites. And the brightest whites here are so much more important actually if you watch a lot of videos that aren't all the time black. Because this one gets so much brighter and it gets actually so blinding. This was actually something that I had to turn down the brightness so much, because it was just too much in the browser with so much brightness. And this is the impressive thing, because blacks are nice to see because you can see the details a little better on an OLED display, but most TVs, especially with HDR content, they shine when it gets bright, and this one shines. And that is definitely one of the main important parts why I decided to go, which is already kind of now spoiled it, for an LCD over an OLED display. OLED has advantages, but for me, especially someone who uses a TV a lot at Windows and so on, yeah, I definitely would go for an LCD. Now the next thing is gaming. We should get into that. I have to say that the input delay seemed ever so slightly better than on an OLED. I can't quite put it into numbers because I can't measure it, but it felt pretty much just about as good as on my monitor, where it was noticeably better than on my projector. So top for gaming. And of course, if you want to play games, I used it on a PC with HDR, I tried it, and back on the A1 I actually said that the sky had a lot of banding, and you kinda could have get rid of it with an option that was available in the settings. You can check that on that review. Not an issue here. So I'm not quite sure what actually changed, but HDR, especially on Formula 1 2017, which supports it, was a completely different experience, completely different one, because I've seen so many people saying of how much of a difference HDR makes in games, and I didn't see it on the OLED. I thought, yeah, brightness is higher and so on, but that's not impressive. On this one I saw it, because if you go into a certain part of the track, for example, and the sun is coming towards you, the whole track was white, blinding white. The sky was white, and this is actually kind of realistic, because also in reality you get blinded by light. You get this here. I didn't get this on the OLED, so even for gaming, for HDR, it's better. I didn't see any ghosting and such. The response was nice. I didn't see any tearing or something like that. So even for fast-paced games, it was great. But the most important part here is that it just looks so darn impressive. And like I said, once you play a game on a TV like this, if you are okay with the input delay, if you are competitive gamer, it definitely won't quite satisfy you. But once you've played on this, it's hard to go back to just a normal monitor, and that's why I guess something like the big format display from Nvidia will make quite a lot of fuss, because that one is especially made for gaming with the lowest response times and so on. Now, any other issues? Now, I could go into things like blooming, for example, but I personally think that these terms have been kind of just invented for people who are desperately looking for something to complain about, or just TVs that are on a way lower level. Because I could imagine myself of seeing a 65-inch TV at around $1,000 that will have some obvious blooming. And this one, I've seen people talking about it. But like I said, I've used it for a month. And I watched it all the time, and I didn't really see anything I should be bothered about. I was totally fine in that regard. And that's why I quickly want to actually go once again into the home menu, just so you can see that. Because after all, this is Android TV. Here you have all the access to the apps. The most important one that I used, which is accessible through one button just alone, is Netflix. Netflix was just great, and this I would definitely prefer over the use with a PC. And of course, you can install apps from the store, games as well. Here are your main inputs, and this is actually the main setting, just so you can see that quick how that actually looks. Channel setup, like I said, I didn't use it with a satellite dish or with cable, because I don't use these anymore. External inputs, display, just so you can see what you actually have here. In the picture mode, you have so many options, and like I said, go into those in case you want to see that in my A1 review, because I had to actually, and let's get to that, tweak this one a little bit more than the A1, especially since I think that the previous reviewer changed it a little bit more into something cinematic, more realistic. I don't want that. I want an impressive screen. So the brightness I changed. Obviously, contrast, I'm not quite sure what it was at box, but this can be left. But for example, black adjust, I had to put to high, which I didn't have to on the A1 due to the AMOLED. But if you use medium or low, blacks just won't be nearly as black. And even though it could maybe have some disadvantages with it, I definitely prefer that way. Also, a few more enhancements were actually necessary to get the picture to where I wanted it to be. Not anything big, because as you can see, I left the sharpness, which is a little bit higher, of course, than on the 65-inch version, since this just has the same resolution, so a better density. Of course, motion flow I had to turn off, but I had to tweak a few little things, like the color, as you can see, 52 for example, the contrast, but nothing big. I have to say though that it seems like the A1 had just a better image processor and just didn't need these extra things, and I think that's legit. So with a little bit of tweaking, you can get what you want out of it, absolutely. And that's why I have to just already get to the conclusion. Design wise, I think it's definitely a looker. The stand works out nice. You could maybe place a soundbar underneath. The back looks almost too good. Here, by the way, is the pattern that you get on the back. This is one of the panels that hides the ports, and I actually didn't even find them at first, which is nice to see. Bezels are small. You can mount it on the walls. You are covered here. With Android TV, you have easy access to the settings, which actually leads me to one thing. Since this is not the highest end model, it also doesn't have the highest end CPU in it, and it is visible. Especially if you sometimes go through menus, you will see some smaller stutters, some small things, just also animations that take a little bit up longer, as you can see. Does it bother me? No, because once I set my TV up, I pretty much jump straight into the Netflix app or use it with Windows or whatever you have to display your devices, and then it doesn't really matter that it's just not quite as fast. Sometimes there is a delay of 1 second more than it was on the A1, but still good enough. Like I said, I will try to get to the 9000 or 900 to see if the different kind of backlight will make an impact, because the thing is, on the A1 I said that it just doesn't have any flaws, because all the great thing it does absolutely great, but it's important not to have any flaws. And if I would call out the pros here, crazy bright, absolutely great colors, sharpness and everything is top notch, and actually some less issues because of the banding and such on HDR, which could have been a thing of mine. But if I would have to call out the main differences compared to an OLED display, those are quite easy. You don't have the viewing angles of an OLED, not really that important. In normal use, it's still more than good enough. It doesn't get quite the blacks, it doesn't get quite the contrast in the deeper segments. is okay. That's the most noticeable difference, but it therefore has the big advantage of just being so much brighter, being just so much more impressive. Of course, also the uniformity, like I said, on the blacks was a little bit there, but nothing that really bothered me in normal use. So that's why I can definitely tell you that this one, for around €1,000 at the 55-inch version, no, I got that wrong, 50-100, that's a 900. 1,500 or 2,000 for the 65-inch version is absolutely recommendable, because I don't think you need to go for anything higher. Of course, I will still try to see if I can get the ZD9, because I want to know what you could possibly get better for €1,200 or dollars more, because I can't really imagine what it could be. Blacks, yeah, that's the main thing. Maybe contrast will be a little bit better, but colors and sharpness and all these things, minor things. Of course, like I said, also compared to the A1, the image processing felt a little bit better. I had less noise, because what I've noticed on this a little bit more without any tweaking on 4K content, where you see usually noise anyways, it was a little bit more obvious, but not enough to make or break it. So actually I had a conversation with someone who said that he would rather buy a $1,500 TV instead of a $3,000 TV, and therefore upgrade every 3 years instead of every 6 years. I personally said the thing. I think that you get a higher end device. You can use that for longer, because the newer models won't get the same technology of those flagships, because usually they trickle down tech. And if you buy a TV 3 years from now on in a lower end segment, it will have about the same tech that the older flagship had. So if you, for example, buy this one, even in about 5 years, and you saved, let's say $1,200, you saved a lot of money, but you still have a device that will be competitive even in 5 years, because I don't see what else could improve. Of course, in 5 years, maybe 8K will be a thing and so on, but it doesn't change the fact that this one is still affordable at this price range, and its quality, it's great. Because I personally just think about it, if you pay, let's say, $500 less, and you use it for 3 or 4 years, the difference that you make up in it for money over that period of time, if that's worth it having for 4 years an inferior picture, I'm not quite so sure. I think this is kind of the sweet spot. This is where you can get the best possible picture for the best possible price. Like I said, in terms of value, the 900 or 9005 could be better, because some people say that just the better black behavior or the backlight isn't quite worth $500 extra on this one. I'll guess I'll just have to try and tell you later on. But this was it, top-notch TV. And this I could definitely see myself using and making no compromises or sacrifices compared to the higher-end models. I don't think a ZD9 can make so much more better to justify that price. But that was it. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was a little bit shorter and a little bit easier to watch, a little bit easier to digest compared to the 30-minute long one. And I'm not even quite sure how long it is, but what I know is that I'm done. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you want to see more of these, because I also want to try some other brands like LG, Samsung and so on. But otherwise, since it's Sunday, I wish you a nice rest of the weekend. Have a nice day. Bye.